Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to a long-delayed Groovy podcast. My name is Ken Kousen, podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and I'm joined by two people this time. First is our old friend, that's you, Baruch. It's your cue. You're not going to say anything. Baruch
No, I
Sadogursky.
was just sorry. I was checking that our YouTube is streaming. Hello, everybody. My name is Baruch. I'm back on Groovy Podcast. We're back with Groovy Podcast. I think that
So,
the delay
where are
was
you?
so long that we actually restarted the new season. And I'm today in Gilroy, California. Sunny, it is. And we have a very, very special guest today.
Yes. Actually, Eric, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yep. So my name's Eric Hegelson. I'm a longtime Groovy Grails user, and I'm in sunny Minnesota today. And yeah, just want to kind of touch base and see what's going on. It's actually my second appearance on the Groovy podcast.
So, are you in the Minneapolis area these days or somewhere else?
I'm out in the middle of nowhere. So
Up in St. Cloud?
yeah, up by St. Cloud. So
Yeah.
yep, surrounded by fields and farmland. But I recently got fast internet out here, so 150 megs. So that's it's quite a bump.
Sweet.
For being in the middle of nowhere.
Excellent. For people who are not aware, Eric was the original Grails champion, right?
Yes, back in 2017.
So it was a spring one? No, was it a 2GX conference, right?
Yes, or they renamed it the G3 Summit, I think.
Oh, right. G3 Summit in 2017. Really? Is it that recently?
Yep. I think I had this just in case we talked about it.
I thought you're going to turn it around. We couldn't see your name there.
I don't know.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Very good. So
G3 Summit was a nice conference, and it kind of sad that they don't do it anymore.
Yeah, that was sad, but it was good to see you there. I remember that we did a podcast from the conference and everything. But in addition to being a Grails champion, you actually still work with the product. And I remember you tweeted relatively recently that you had updated or ported a project from Grails 3 up to Grails 4. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's actually my second project that we've upgraded to Grails 4. So it's a smaller kind of website just for kind of tracking a few things with Bobby Warner. So I work at Agile Orbit. So we're a consulting company that primarily focuses on the JVM infrastructure and Grails. But yeah, it's just a small project, and we're in between contracts. So we're like, let's just upgrade this and see how it works. And took about an hour or so to get it up and running, and we deployed it the next day. So working pretty well. And then I do have a second project, which is quite a bit bigger. It's been around since Grails 2.3-ish. So it's gone through many ports. And that one probably took about, 4 hours or a day or to a day. So half a day to a day to get ported over. So I think the real takeaway there is that the Grails, if you're on Grails 3 already and going to Grails 4 is not what Grails 2 to Grails 3 was.
Yeah, so those are great news, but except of, it's not a very painful transition, I would ask, but hey, why would we even do that? What are the benefits of Grails 4?
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to Grails 4 right now because as we know, the JVM is changing quite a bit. The long-term support releases, JDK 8 is, Oracle's, you can pay for support, or there's many vendors who offer support now. So you can still run on JDK 8, but Grails 4 is the first Grails to support JDK 11 plus, because it's based on Spring Boot 2.1, which is the first Spring Boot to support JDK 11. Has the latest Hibernate 5.4, which has a lot of memory improvements. Gradle 5, so you get a lot of speed improvements and just new things there. And with Gradle 5.6 coming out really soon, it'll have that incremental Groovy compilation as well. So, or improvements to incremental Groovy compilation. So that'll be nice.
I mean, I've tried running it with Java 11 again, as you say, the current long-term support release, and it's great that it runs under that. Still gives that ugly warning. Eventually, Groovy will make that warning go away, but not yet, right?
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it's the anything older than Spring 2 or Spring Boot 2 actually was feeling very old at this point, and being able to go to Spring 5 and Spring Boot 2.1 is quite an improvement. Of course, the biggest thing supposedly about Grails 4 is that they have changed the parent context, so that now it uses, I don't know, parts of Micronaut. I don't quite understand how that works under the hood, but it's not all Spring anymore.
Right. Yeah, the parent context for the Spring application is a Micronaut context. So you still have a Spring context there, and you get everything that Spring offers there. But you do get a lot of the benefits that Micronaut has as well. And that is still actually a big question for me too, is that there hasn't been many guides or much guidance on what that provides you yet. And I'm hoping that OCI and community members can put out a few more blog posts or documentation on what that means. There's one obvious one, which is the non-blocking HTTP client, which is very nice. They have the declarative or implementation of that, so it's really nice, and it is actually the recommended HTTP client now for Grails instead of REST Builder or those other plugins, or the Gorm REST client and things like that. So that's one major benefit that you can take advantage of right now. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. I just figuring out how it all plugs in to each other, how Spring and Micronaut play together will be the big question. And hopefully as more people start playing with it, that can start learning more about how that's going to work together.
Well, of course, Java 11 has an HTTP client itself, which supposedly works asynchronously and allows you to integrate with publishers and subscribers. I haven't played with that in Grails. I know it's in the JVM. Of course, that would require you to use Java 11. But the HTTP client from Micronaut is supposed to be very nice. So are you using it for tests, or are you using it for your business logic? Where do you use it?
Yeah, I've created a few clients for it, and one's a business logic and one is a test harness. So yeah, it really just plugs into the Grails integration test harness the way any HTTP client would. So you can pretty much kind of replace it when you're upgrading to just use the new HTTP client. And then yeah, with business logic, I just integrated one simple API, the reChapka, CAPTCHA. There you go. It's a simple API, but it's just a few annotations and you have a whole client, and it works pretty well.
So have they upgraded a bunch of plugins yet, or is that a plugin that's already been upgraded, or did you just use one from 3 and it automatically worked? Or?
Yeah, well, just talking about plugins in general is that many plugins actually still work in the Grails 3 plugins will work in Grails 4. I actually have a blog post, and we can put it in the show notes, where I'm tracking kind of as people report them, or as people or as I'm using them, do they work, do they not, is there a workaround, and things like that. So I think right now there's only one plugin that I'm tracking that still needs an upgrade, but everything else. So I use just for example, let me pull it up.
While you're doing that, where's your blog?
You can share your screen, by the way, because we're streaming on YouTube, so people will be happy to see. If you
we'll have to explain for the people listening on audio, but
feel free. We don't care about them. Just
Look, you want to cut out half our users. That, I mean, we don't have that many that we can give up a bunch like that.
Well, let's see here. I have to close all of my other tabs here. Let's see. So yeah,
is this the one at GitHub? Eric Hegelson at github.github.io?
No, I just pinged it to you on Twitter. It's on dev.to, which is a kind of a Medium-esque platform, but just for developers, and has a very nice editor and makes writing blog posts really nice and quick and easy. So I've started to adopt that. I haven't moved all my stuff over there yet, but
I have not gotten the tweet. So
DM.
I didn't get the DM either. I didn't get anything from you.
Weird. Okay. Let me share my screen then.
That's Twitter.
Okay.
You know how Twitter is, I know that we're connected because, that's how we set this up.
We might end
Well,
up having a show notes page anyway for Eric's resources, like the blog post and everything.
But
So
while you were doing that, I just wanted to, again, mention to people that, of course, the big benefit supposedly of moving to the Micronaut context away from the Spring context is going to be, well, size and speed.
Mhm.
The idea is that it will use a lot less memory and that the size of the application will be a lot smaller. And of course, using the AOT, the ahead of time compilation and everything being done. Actually, maybe that's not the way to say it. Maybe it's more that things are being done at compile time rather than at runtime should speed up the response time and the startup time and everything in the application. Oh, just got your tweet there.
Yep. Yeah. So speaking of that, that my application starts up about 2 times faster than it did. So
That's good.
In development mode. So that's promising. And then one big thing to mention is actually a pain point is that Spring Loaded, the class reloader for Spring, or that Spring and Pivotal used to maintain, is no longer maintained. So hot reloading is out, which was a huge performance or huge development time benefit of using Grails, was that you could change a class and it would be reloaded. So Spring has implemented the Spring Dev Tools fast reload. So what it does, it has two class loaders, one for kind of the stuff that doesn't change in Spring, and then one for your things. So it only has to reload your code, but it's still not the 1 to 2 seconds or less with Spring Loaded.
Really?
Yeah.
So that was. Sorry, go ahead.
It's kind of unfortunate that there's no kind of mainstream besides JRebel class reloader for the JVM really right now.
So with Spring Boot apps, of course, as you say, they use the DevTools plugin, I guess you'd say, inside there. So you're saying Grails took that and kind of split it into the things that Grails does plus the things that you add yourself?
Well, actually, that's what Spring DevTools, that's a new fast reload in the Spring DevTools, and then Grails just takes advantage of that now instead of hot reloading because it doesn't work anymore.
So what you're saying is they delegated to Spring, and of course that made it slow.
Well, yes, I wouldn't say that, but yes, that's what I'm saying.
If anybody was listening, that'd be a controversial statement, but don't worry about it.
No problem.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, I remember, by the way, that blog post that you wrote, the one that you sent about removing illegal reflective access, the Grails one, which was just staggering because you wind up adding in, oh my goodness, what, 30, 50, whatever, open modules just to say JVM open module args and that huge list. And then that makes the warning go away. I just haven't tried it yet, but I assume that works. Yeah,
well, that's actually the way that Groovy does it in 2.5 right now. So if you add that environment variable when you're starting Groovy, that's what it does. And actually talk to Daniel about how to do that for Grails because I just didn't understand how it works. So thanks to him for helping me figure that out. And I actually sent you the wrong blog post. That's why.
I do remember that post though. That was a big one. But you say by the time we hit Groovy 3, of course, that'll be gone.
Right.
Whenever that happens to come out.
Yeah. So I
presume next year sometime.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing too, is that a while ago, we were talking and thinking that, Grails 4 might be on Groovy 3 but that didn't happen. So it's going to be interesting as we go forward, when Spring Boot 2.2 comes out and Groovy 3 comes out, how quick Grails will be to, be on the uptick of doing those upgrades.
I did find your the Grails 4 update notes, and I really appreciate your listing all the different mechanisms, and hopefully this will be just a question of updating individual pieces inside of Grails rather than having to do who knows, maybe they will do a 4.0.1 release or maybe even 4.1 if that's big enough. But it's hard to update Groovy when you have basically one guy being paid to work on it. Everybody else is doing volunteer work, and that one guy's at halftime or something like that. So it's tough.
It is. No, and I appreciate all the work that they put into it.
So what else? Of course, so your bottom line is that Grails 3 to Grails 4 is not a huge change because most of the big changes are versions of Spring and associated technologies plus under the hood improvements. Anything else come to mind? Anything else you had to deal with?
Not really with the upgrade. I mean, it's just those things I mentioned that if you're if you kind of draw inside the lines of the framework, which is from my perspective, I use a framework, so I do draw inside the lines so I can get things done quickly. Your upgrade path will be really easy. If you chose to draw outside those lines and kind of get into the weeds of Spring, which you do need to do, or hibernate, which from time to time you do need to do that. But just understanding where you kind of went outside the framework and following those upgrade paths. I know that there's some bigger changes in Hibernate that are coming with their as they've moved away from detached criteria, and how Gorm is struggling, or not struggling, but there's no one-to-one replacement for that. So I know talking to the Grails team on that, there's been a lot of kind of back and forth on how they can keep Gorm the same while supporting newer versions of Hibernate. So
actually, that's something, you hit something I haven't heard. Are you saying that Hibernate is fundamentally changing how it's going to operate soon?
Yeah, they've deprecated the criteria, which is not the criteria API, but that's not what in Grails or Gorm you think of the create criteria. That's different. But Grails under the hood uses the criteria API quite a bit. So as that's changing, and there's a thread on their Jira about that, but I know that there's some pain points on trying to upgrade. But now, of course, with Micronaut Data coming out as well, that's something we can probably take advantage of in Grails.
There's a segue for you, Baruch.
So
didn't want to jump in on that. Okay, so one other thing, by the way, just out of that Hibernate criteria, have they recommended a replacement, or are they just removing something?
It's deprecated right now in 5.4, but I think you'll get a lot of warning messages, and I mentioned that in my notes as well. You can disable those log messages, of course, but there's no one-to-one replacement yet. So I know Graham or James from OCI would have a lot more more details on that.
We're stuck waiting to see what they do then, partly.
Yep.
By the way, I noticed in the little toy playing around with it that I've done, I did try to use the java.time packages, but when I made a property of a domain class, local date or whatever, then the form doesn't generate. I mean, I'll probably have to write my own scaffolding, but I like to start off with scaffolding just to get up to date. And unfortunately, there's no built-in form type apparently for a local date. Maybe local date time. I don't know. I haven't tried that, but I was like, whoops, suddenly now I got to go back to date again. And also, do the Hibernate people, they still use date created and last updated. Are they going to move that to local date, or that's still, you probably don't know?
You can, I usually set that to instance when I'm developing my app. So they can be in any timestamp.
Oh, really?
Class.
You can use instant on that?
Yep. Yeah,
I'll have to try that, because I don't want to use date anymore if I can avoid it. I'd much rather use the java.time package.
Yeah. And then actually that's a good topic. In Groovy 2.5, they removed the date helpers that they had. You have to actually include them yourself. And it's a different dependency. I mean, they've just split out the module to a different dependency. So if you do, date +1 or something like that, it will say it won't know what to do. So
I ran into that right away. And you're saying you have to include the Groovy-date util package, right, or whatever, the dependency rather. Okay, so at least I know how to fix that now. That's good. By the way, I did notice that you put in there that Spring Security is still fine, and that of course is probably the most popular plugin in all of Grails, right?
Yeah, and that's I don't know if you probably remember when we went from Grails 2 to Grails 3, there was that quite a bit of lag where the Spring Security core wasn't upgraded.
Right.
Caused some angst in the community, but I'm glad to see that a lot of plugin maintainers, even outside of OCI, have been updating their plugins to make sure they work with Grails 4. So
that's reassuring. I was glad to see that as well. So you say the JSON views are still working okay? They said they weren't, but they are now.
Yeah, during the RC process, tried to open a few bugs or figure things out as we went along.
Okay. And the other looks like everything else. We'll just put a link in the show notes. I just wanted to get an idea what you'd already encountered on that. Now, you also have worked with Micronaut directly, right? You've built some Micronaut apps. What sorts of things have you done with Micronaut?
Yep. So recently had a client that, Micronaut is, a micro framework and has dependency injection, Micronaut Data now, HTTP client, and templating libraries. So actually a command line profile. So what this client wanted was some reports generated on a, timed interval. So I actually used Micronaut CLI with their dependency injection and their testing harness and all that fun stuff, and built just a reporting tool for them that you just spin up a Docker container, run the reports, and shut down. So, I mean, while you could probably, you could just write that out procedurally, right, and write a whole bunch of code, and that's kind of what they had before, is that, using dependency injection and, a testing harness and all this niceties really made the project go quite quickly, just because had all those things you're kind of used to when building an application, even though it was just kind of a small reporting. So I think the main takeaway for me was that you can use a lot of the pieces in Micronaut for many different things outside of a web app or a Lambda function or something like that. You can use it it's versatile.
So my question would be now, especially with Micronaut Data and the dependency injection and everything, the differences between Micronaut and Grails 4 become more and more subtle, I would say. So obviously, with your consulting background, when you come to a customer and need to suggest using either of those, what will be the guidelines of where you would want to start a project with Grails 4 and where Micronaut is a better fit?
I think the biggest decision point is kind of where you ran this app and how big is it? Is it going to be a monolith or a bigger app and have kind of more traditional, a web view, or a more traditional API where many things are kind of in one application? Or is it kind of we're coming in and building one thing? I think that's where kind of my decision points would be around whether to recommend one or the other. I guess there's a lot of async stuff. Async is kind of built into the heart of Micronaut. So if async processing is an important requirement, that would be another point. But it's still Grails and Spring provide a lot of stuff out of the box. So it's kind of a hard decision to talk about it abstractly, but I still have quite a few apps on Grails, and I've actually run into some issues with Spring WebSockets. I've actually explored just pulling that piece of my application out into a Micronaut WebSocket with some other things around it. So, I mean, it depends, as it always is, but yeah.
Now, Grails had some asynchronous capabilities in it, and as I recall, they were mostly using reactive libraries like RxJava or related ones like that. Is Micronaut doing things differently than that?
I think now I'll probably say it wrong or probably get it wrong, but I think it's all built, on RxJava, or just the capabilities in RxJava.
So whether that's the actual library or not, they're using the reactive model in order to do asynchronous coding.
Yep. I mean, looking at like the controllers and services and everything, everything's, you return observables and all that fun stuff. And actually, that's one weak point of my development skills. I'm so used to the non-reactive way of programming that, I've been trying to read up as much as I can on reactive programming.
That's funny, because it goes into what we spoke with Ken when we were waiting for you about how concurrency is hard for human brain to understand. And we spoke about how we try to get our head around coroutines, but I think reactive goes into the same bucket of this is now how our brain works.
I don't know how. I don't know. I mean, Jen Strader always has she's the one who maintains the over under at what point during our podcast do we mention Kotlin, and you just mentioned coroutines. So whoever had that time apparently won or whatever. Actually, when I started looking at reactive stuff, it was in the context of Spring. So I learned Project Reactor, reactor.io or whatever it is, rather than RX Java, even though there's an adapter. But that's because Project Reactor was the library they use in the Spring framework. So I still think in those terms, but I'm going to have to learn RX Java as well. And of course, Kotlin has these coroutines, which is a completely separate model. And of course, Micronaut apps can be written in Kotlin. I wonder if they will wind up leveraging that or not. I have no idea. Of course, Grails will be in the Groovy ecosystem, and the Java one, I assume they'll stick with RX Java in there pretty much. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the big controversy, not that Eric probably don't want to wade into this, but Baruch lives for controversy, of course.
That's exactly why I'm here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you got the ghost on your, what is that on your shirt anyway? Oh, it's a frog. It's a ghost frog?
It's an X-ray frog because, it's just frog X-ray.
Yeah. Skeleton frog, right. With that. I should never have brought that up. Let's move on. So at any rate, the big controversy that came out was that the OCI people came up with a persistence framework. How would you describe what we now will call Micronaut Data?
Well, the original aspect was pre-computed data repositories, right? So
right.
Putting the having the computing ahead of time, as which most of what Micronaut does, your data sources and the logic around your data sources inquiries to be faster, right?
So pre-computed, how do you say it again?
Pre-computed data repository.
Data repository. So it sounds a lot like GORM, except it's all done at compile time.
Yeah,
right?
that's the huge difference. It sounds more like Spring Data, because it's in compile time, but obviously it's more elegant because it's all groovy.
So Baruch, this is your big chance. Do you want to talk about the controversy or not?
Well, yeah, I have to say that the whole thing with the name was I think treated fairly well, and so when the first name came out, I had this kind of the same weird question: do the people run it by someone who might have those associations? And there is a Wikipedia entry for that, so it's kind of it's a problem. The name it's a problem, and I'm like, well, we'll see how it plays. And then a couple of people complain, and they're like, yeah, we're changing the name, and that's fine. I mean, no one was defensive about it, and no one went into this, oh no, this is not what you mean, that what you should think about. It was like, yeah, we heard the community, it's okay, you don't like the name, we'll change the name. Those are early days, no one is committed. So yeah, I mean, there wasn't enough controversy for me to really enjoy it.
Yeah, I think they handled it as well as they could have handled it. I think the fact that it came up at all makes you wonder how broad a community they tried it out on. You know what I mean? Before they hit that. But regardless, when they identified that some people had a serious problem with the name, they didn't hesitate. They clearly, I feel, I mean, you're in marketing sometimes or in dev relations. I imagine they have tons of mugs and T-shirts and everything now that are collector's items. But at any rate, they changed the name to Micronaut Data. I did find that the Micronaut Data documentation, but is there a website for Micronaut Data somewhere?
I'm not sure.
I mean, all I found was micronaut-projects.github.io. You know what I mean? It's a GitHub IO page. So I wonder, I didn't see a link off of the original Micronaut site, which I assume means that we're just very early in the life cycle of this stuff and that eventually all that stuff will be coming out. Have you had a chance to play with it at all or not?
No, just besides just looking at the documentation, I haven't had a chance to play with it.
It looks, as you say, it looks just like Spring Data. I mean, the idea of extending CRUD repository and all those sorts of things. I mean, that's exactly what we're accustomed to in the Spring world. So
Well, I
Very
think,
interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, even in I think in the introduction blog post, they gave homage to Spring Data and, kind of talked about Gorm came out and, when they were pivotal, how they, it was kind of the precursor to Spring Data. And now, Micronaut has the, opportunity to come in a lot later, but with learning all the stuff that they learned through Gorm, Spring Data, and all these other projects that they've all worked on for years and years and years, and kind of come to it with a fresh set of eyes. And I mean, that's what Micronaut Data, and all these things are, is that they don't have the legacy to code around. They have a fresh.
Yeah, it does look like a rewrite of, okay, we learned a lot for all those years of Grails, and let's take the essence of it and rewrite it. Yeah, that's how it works.
So it sounds like that's going to be completely independent of what they do in Gorm, though. I mean, Gorm is going to stay separate from that in Grails. Is that right?
Yes, and there's some dynamic capabilities that can't be computed at compile time. I've just read the discussions on that, so I don't know them. I can't speak to them firsthand, but I know that they say that it's good for these use cases, but there's still other use cases where, JPA or something, you'll have to, use something else for those cases. So.
Now, you have more than just a trivial interest in these things. I mean, it's not just that part of your job is to write these apps. You actually wrote the first, as I recall, Grails 3 book available.
Yes.
Maybe the only Grails 3 book available. What's the URL for that?
Grails3book.com.
I knew it was something like that. All one word, right?
Yep.
Grails, and then number 3.
Already reserved Grails4book.com?
Someone took that already.
And
really?
Oh my God. Those cyber squatters.
I know.
They figured out the algorithm.
They did. They can make lots of money with that Grails4book.com domain.
So somebody actually beat you to that. I wonder who that is. I have no idea. Anyway, so I think you mentioned in a tweet at some point you are in the process of updating your book for Grails 4. Is that right?
Right. Yep. I wrote that blog post on the upgrading, so I've been kind of, and the kind of undertone of the Grails 3 book is this practical Grails. Like, it's from my experience and from what I've done in either, my projects or consulting work. So I want to make sure that, it's, when people read it, it's something that they can apply to what they're doing, and not just a copy of the manual or something like that. But I am upgrading it to Grails 4, and there will be a Grails 4 release. And the thing I'm struggling with is, and I've wanted to put a Twitter poll out there or something, ask the community's opinion, is it, do I just upgrade this book and keep all the same content and concepts the same and just, change it from 3 to 4, recompile and see what happens? Or do I take a fresh look at it, or, or somewhere in the middle? So I haven't quite decided on the approach I want to take on that yet. One is a lot less effort, and one is obviously a lot more effort. So as you've written books, writing a book is quite a bit of effort, and just setting aside the time to get that done is no small task.
So not next week, huh?
No, not next week. No. Though I will say many of the, I was talking to actually Jackie, who my wife, who also is a developer and in Grails, and a controller that compiles in Grails 2 will compile in Grails 3 and Grails 4 as well. I mean, the core concepts of what Grails provides haven't really changed. Again, going back to if you draw inside the lines of the framework, you'll have a much better time using a framework. So.
But 2 to 3 was a huge change. I mean, that really was dramatic. But
right.
I understand from what you're saying, though, the 3 to 4 is going to be very small. In fact, the point that you're able to debate whether or not just to upgrade an existing app or whether to write something completely different shows that Grails 4 isn't really that radically different from 3, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's
that's why the migration is easy, and I think that the reason it's called 4 is generally this trend of switching to major versions for smaller changes, right? So you can see the trend in browsers and what's not, like Chrome 375 or whatever the version now. So it's actually 3 dot something, which is 4 because a lot of internal infrastructure changed, but less changes on the functionality and the interaction.
Yeah, and Grails takes so many, so many things of other projects, right? Hibernate upgrades at one pace, Spring and Spring Boot have upgraded at another pace. The JDK upgrades at another pace. So trying to kind of boil those all into one project is and keeping the versions sane is a hard task.
Yeah, I saw that was a pretty funny tweet from Graham yesterday, from Graham Roche, saying that what is he set up was it a Grails app that he set up with Dependabot or whatever, the one that works on GitHub that automatically detects your changes in your dependencies, and he said he practically did a denial of service attack on himself or on GitHub or whatever, but just because all these different versions changed and everything had to be upgraded, and they're all tiny upgrades too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Your book was self-published, as I recall, right?
Yep. It's a ebook, and I actually talked to 2 different people about publishing, but and a couple of authors about their experiences with publishing, and just decided, this is a niche market, and I think self-publishing is, selfishly, would like to keep more of the money for the effort I put in. So, I pay to host it, and I do the support and talk to people, but I've sold, actually, I think I'm 1,200
Really?
copies. So, yeah, it takes effort, but I think the effort I put into it now was worth it to do self-publishing. And in today, right? It's software. We can write software, and books are practically software. Much of all my examples are pulled in ASCII Doctor from code, and they're on source code repositories. So I just thought that was the right way to go for me.
Well, I do recommend.
Here we go. Here's someone who can actually buy a Grails 4 book domain for whatever price it is. You're doing so well with your book.
Doing so well, yes.
Well, we'll just push Baruch at them, and he'll get that domain for you somehow.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to cross him, so But yeah, that's fantastic that the book did so well, and I do recommend it still. Of course, if anybody's people on Grails 3, which presumably will be the dominant version for a while, it's going to take a while for the community to adjust to 4. But I really look forward to seeing what you produce on Grails 4 on that. I presume that'll be a separate purchase. It won't just be, maybe there'll be an upgrade price or something.
Well, yeah, it's software, right? So they'll probably, it depends. Again, that goes back to that, what I was saying is that what approach I take. Do I put, some effort, medium effort, a lot of effort, and that will determine the price. But yeah, there'll be, if you purchased it before, I will, I'm a consumer of things too. So I'll make it fair. And
yeah, well, I'm sure that Baruch and I will each buy one, right, Baruch? You'll buy one, right?
Always.
Okay, so that's 2. Yeah, exactly. So you're on your way, man.
Yes.
Anything else going on professionally or in the Groovy or Grails community that you want to comment on?
I guess I just said I was thinking about one note about, and we kind of talked about before about just kind of the opportunities in Grails, for Grails jobs in consulting, because I know that at least in Grails Slack, that's kind of a topic that comes up every once in a while. I'll say that many companies who we work for as consultants, they don't advertise that they're running Grails or other things like that. They kind of sometimes you can read between the lines and figure out that they're running Grails or something like that. But we've been doing this for 6 years now, 6+ years since we left our corporate jobs and started doing consulting. But during that whole time, we've only had a month or 2 of downtime that we haven't had either a Grails or something related to the JVM and primarily Grails consulting work. So there are opportunities out there. It's just how do people find those jobs? And because we're in technology, and technology is our kind of bread and butter, and that's what how we make money. So how do we find out those opportunities for people who are looking? So
Well, that's good to know. I mean, it's good to hear that there's still a demand out there. I mean, I tend to hear that from OCI people. The problem is that, I mean, OCI being the maintainers of the whole framework, I mean, if there isn't enough work to keep OCI going, they've got a serious problem. So I think that's
True.
good news. But to hear that it's from a separate company, something smaller and more focused and everything, that's really good to hear. Well, I really appreciate your taking the time to join us, and I'm glad that you've had some pleasant experiences with Grails 4, and I really do wish you the best on that book, because every time I write a book, I say, that's it, never again. And
But aren't you writing a book now?
actually, I'm in the middle of two of them, so it's really awful, you know.
And another discussion that we had before you joined was about self-publishing versus the publishers and everything. And although for me writing a book was also a horrifying experience, I think the self-publishing makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of issues there, and that sounds like that could be the subject of a future podcast. I don't want to, but I'm glad that yours is still making progress and that you are planning to work on that. That's I can think of nobody better to do that. I certainly can think of nobody else willing to do that. So that's great news. Baruch, is there anything you want to bring up or anything you want to talk about?
No, I just want to thank Eric for joining us and sharing a little bit of that. So I guess we all know a little bit more about Grails 4 and Micronaut Data something. So can we still call it? No, we won't.
What's Micronaut Data? That's all right. We'll stick with that. You know,
we'll stick with that.
We have enough troubles. We don't need to drive away our own.
No, we don't. No. Yeah. And as I mentioned, it was well handled, so there is no reason to to go with that. So yeah, Eric, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Great, Baruch. Anything else? Or are we all set there?
Done. We will put all the links that Eric will send us into the show notes. And yeah, I mean, thank you for all our how many people we have now that listen to the podcast? Like 5?
How can you tell? I'm just guessing, you know.
Yeah, no, but maybe with Eric is actually more.
Well, it's possible Jackie will listen to it as well now.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly, right. So at least.
I mean, my wife doesn't read my own newsletter, so I mean, who can tell? You know.
Well, it's long. It's long.
It is long. I do read it every Sunday.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right. Now I got to think about it before I write the next. At any rate, but great to see everybody. And we will try to have another podcast, not waiting quite so long for next time, but we did have our 2 major events this time, the updates of Micronaut and of course, Grails 4 coming out. So we'll definitely be around sooner rather than later.
All right. So thank you very much, and have a great 2 weeks, 2 months, to whatever we will be next. And yeah, we will see you and you will hear from us soon enough. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.